Hosea, chapter 11. Hopefully the audio is better on this one than the last one. We're working on it. Boys and gerbils, we're working on it. When Israel was a child, get your Bibles out, flip them open, read with me, use your own eyeballs and your own word. Do not take my word for it. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Mitzrayim I called my son. They called to them, so they went from their face. They slaughtered to the Baals, Baal, false idols, false gods, and burned incense to carved images. And I taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I drew them with ropes of man, with cords of love, and I was to them as those who take the yoke from their neck, and I bent down, fed them. No. Let him return to the land of Mitzrayim, and let Ashur, Assyria, be his king, because they refuse to repent. And the sword shall whirl in his cities, and it shall demolish his gate bars, and consume, because of their own counsels. My people are bent towards backsliding from me. Though they call to the one above, none of them exalt him. How could I give you up, Ephraim? How could I hand you over, Israel? How could I make you like Admah? How could I set you like Seboim? My heart turns within me, all my compassion is kindled. I shall not let the heat of my wrath burn. I shall not turn to destroy Ephraim, for I am El, and not man, the set apart one in your midst, and I shall not come in enmity. Let them follow Yahweh. Like a lion he roars. When he roars, then suns shall tremble from the west. They shall tremble like a bird from Mitzrayim, and like a dove from the land of Ashur. And I shall let them dwell in their own houses. Ephraim has surrounded me with lying, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah is still wandering with Elohim, and is true to the set-apart one. Ephraim is feeding on wind and pursuing an east wind. All the day he increases falsehood and ruin. And they make a covenant with Ashur, and oil is sent to Mitzrayim. And Yahweh has a controversy with Judah to punish Jacob according to his ways, to repay him according to his deeds. He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and his strength he strove with Elohim. He strove with the messenger and overcame. He wept and sought his favor. He found him in Beit El, and there he spoke to us. Even Yahweh Elohim of hosts, Yahweh is his remembrance. Therefore return to your Elohim, guard loving commitment and right ruling, and wait on your Elohim continually. A merchant, in his hand are scales of deceit, he loves to oppress. And Ephraim says, indeed, I have become rich, I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors they shall find in me no crookedness that is in sin. But I am Yahweh, your Elohim, since the land of Mitzrayim. Again I shall make you dwell in tents as in the day of the appointed time. And I have spoken to the prophets, and have increased visions, and through the prophets I gave parables. Is Gilead wicked? Certainly. They have been false. In Gilgal they have slaughtered bulls. Also their slaughter places are as heaps on a plowed field. And when Jacob fled the country for Aram, Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept watch. And by a prophet Yahweh brought Israel out of Mitzrayim, and by a prophet he was watched over. Ephraim has provoked most bitterly, so his master left his blood guilt on him, and repaid him for his reproach. Now, in an effort to not interrupt the creator of the universe, seeing as we've read all of 11 and 12, let's go back and examine this, study this line by line. So Hosea 11 is considered an unexpected prophecy, and that's in quotes, meaning, my understanding, of all of the Old Testament prophecies that relate to the coming of Mashiach, this was not, Hosea 11 was not a chapter a bit of scripture that anyone ascribed any expectancy to. Not that it wasn't important, but how shall we say, it wasn't until Messiah came the first time that people started making the connection between Hosea 11 and Mashiach. I think that's pretty cool. So let's look at this. Verse 1, 11 verse 1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Mitzrayim I called my son. So not only did that happen, the Exodus occurred about 500 years before the time that Hosea is writing this. Yeshua was stewarded in Mitzrayim when Herod was trying to kill all of the young men, the babies of Judah. The Lion of Judah. We'll see that again in this portion. Yeshua being of the tribe of Judah. Matthew chapter 1, which is why Messiah tells the woman at the well, deliverance is of the Yehudim. Salvation is of the Yehudim. Yeshua, Yahshua, Joshua, Hosea. They're all alliterations of the same name. And they mean Yah's salvation. Super cool. They called to them, these false Baals, called to Israel. So they went from their face. They slaughtered to the Baals, the Baals, and burned incense to carve images, neither of which we're allowed to do per the Torah. There is no God but God. Do not make a carved image. Yeah. And most perhaps, denominations of Christendom are absolutely guilty of this. Burned incense to carved images. Look at verse 3. I taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by their arms. You've ever had a toddler? You walk behind them holding their arms while they get their feet underneath them. This is just a beautiful example of the father being a father to Ephraim. Ephraim here being indicative of Israel. And note again that we're in this two-house situation here, the house of Israel, the house of Judah, as we've previously expanded upon. But they did not know that I healed them. They didn't know that they were walking with Yah, even as he was holding their arms so that they wouldn't fall over. They're like little children. Messiah tells us to be like little children in our belief. But little children know when their daddy's holding their arms. Little children know when their daddy's in the same room or the same house. Ephraim toddled along thinking they were doing it all by themselves. And I drew them with ropes of man, with cords of love. Ropes of man. Some of the commentary on this, on ropes of man, compares this to kind of like a string or a cord that you would tie around the waist of or onto the back of a child as they're learning to walk so that you can hold them up as they walk. Not quite having your child on a leash. Some of the other commentaries on this ropes of man, cords of love, talks about how we are wrapped as men with these cords, and that our ways are not his ways are not our ways, but he is entirely possible in his ways to convict us and speak into us using our ways. In other words, the physical mind of man is capable of comprehending enough so that we experience conviction, the spiritual mind, if you will, of Elohim. There's enough of us in him that we can recognize him in our physical body and be convicted by him to do his ways, not our ways. And then look at verse 4. And I was to them as those who take the yoke from their neck. And I bent down and fed them. Yeshua not only physically came down as Yah made flesh, as the physical manifestation of the Creator, he also bent down on several occasions to heal people and fed them. Jeremiah 3:15, and I shall raise up Ra'ah shepherds, pastors over you, after my own heart, says Yahweh, to feed you with knowledge and understanding. I took the yoke from their neck. Come to me, all ye who labor. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Yeshua, Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. An unexpected prophecy. No, let him return to the land of Mitzrayim, where you were slaves, where you complained and whined constantly. But yet, you had your food, you had your roof. You might have had to toil all day for your food, and you might have been owned by another man to have your roof. So your security and your provision was in a man-made system, but not Elohim. And let Assyria be his king, the Assyrian exile. Why? Because they refused to repent, to shuv, turn from doing their ways and turn back to Elohim, turn back to the Father and do his ways. And the sword shall whirl in his cities, and it shall demolish his gate bars and consume because of their own counsels. They're going to fall victim to these external physical threats because they took counsel in themselves, not counsel in Yahweh. They did not seek his face. They didn't repent. They didn't turn. Verse 7, my people are bent towards backsliding from me. They lean in the direction of sin. They lean in the direction of separation from Yah. Though they call to the one above, none of them exalt him. They may pray, they may be going through the motions, but their heart condition is not one of obedience to Elohim. The box checker mentality. I showed up to church. I put money in the plate. Yeah, but what are the two greatest commands? Rabbi, what is the greatest command in all the Torah? Matthew 22:36. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your whole heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. With everything you got. Deuteronomy 6. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On this hangs all the Torah and the prophets. The cornerstone of the Torah and the prophets is loving Elohim with everything that you've got and loving your neighbor as yourself. And unequal weights and measures are an abomination to Yahweh, as we're going to see Proverbs 11:1 when we get into chapter 12, verse 7. And if unequal weights and measures are an abomination to the Most High, that means that we, as a body, as a corpus of believers, don't get to have different definitions of what love is, which is where the Torah comes into play. I knew not sin but by the law, says Shaul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul. And notice here in 11, verse 7, though they call to the one above, none of them exalt him. Compare that with the experience of Job, as many people know him. No J in Hebrew. The experience of Job, regardless of what station of life, how many worldly possessions, how much wealth Job had, he still sought the Father's face. He still exalted him. And note that if you haven't read Job in a while, Job begins with Hasatan, the enemy, the accuser, coming to Elohim, to the throne of Elohim, saying, hey, I want to start some shenanigans. And Elohim says, have you considered my servant Job? Yah thought so highly of Job and his belief that he gave the enemy a challenge. He said, go see if you can break that one. And the enemy, at the direction of Elohim, took every bit of physical comfort from Job, including his friends. His own friends turn against him. And yet and still Job exalts Elohim. And then when all is said and done, Job asks the Father, why? Why did you allow this to happen? And the Father's response is incredible. not in compassion, but in authority. He goes up one side of Job and down the other. Who are you to question me? Were you there when I stored up the winter snow in the storehouses of the heaven? Were you there when I gave the earth and the sea its law? Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? You were but a speck of dust. Talk about perspective. And these backsliding people, Hosea 11, they have no perspective on this. They've forgotten that they are specks of dust that have the honor and the blessing of serving the creator of the universe, and are instead going through the motions of what service would look like if one had an obedient heart, but without the appropriate heart condition to be in service to Elohim. If you've ever had a bad employee on your team, they might be doing all the things, checking all the boxes. They're getting their work done. But man, their attitude just sucks. Same here. But then look at the compassion of Yahweh. How could I give you up, Ephraim? This son that he's walking with, holding them by the arms as they toddle along. How could I give you up, Ephraim? How could I hand you over, Israel? How could I make you like Admah? How could I set you like Seboim? My heart turns within me, all my compassion is kindled. What is Admah? What is Seboim? See, we're all familiar with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but we're not intimately familiar with it, most of us. Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 of 7 cities that were destroyed in the valley of Sodom. Some of those other cities include Admah and Seboim. Come out of her, my people, lest you partake of her sins and receive of her plagues. Revelation 18 verse 4, I believe. Proximity matters. Proximity to sin is asking for sin to enter into your life, and therefore for judgment to enter into your life. Sin goes outside the camp. This is an Old Testament Torah deep understanding. Sin goes outside the camp, just like infectious disease goes out the camp, because we don't want it to spread from one to the next to the next. Sin, 1 John 3 verse 4, transgression of the law. All who do sin do lawlessness. All who transgress the word of Elohim do lawlessness. Well, I'm under the word made flesh. Cool. Is he God? Yeah, he's God. Awesome. Read Malachi 3 verse 6. I'm the Lord Yahweh Sabaoth, I change not. Which means that God made flesh cannot change the words of God the Father, the Creator. And so sin goes outside the camp because it's just as infectious diseases are. That's why the word holy, be holy, or sanctified, depending on which translation you're reading, literally means in Hebrew to be set apart, to be separate from. And so Admah and Seboim were destroyed along with Sodom and Gomorrah, because the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were enough that though they may have been the capital of the sin in the region, their network effect on the other dwelling places around Sodom and Gomorrah was enough that those other places experienced judgment too. And this is what the Father's talking about in verse 8. How could I do that to you, my son? The compassion that's in that, it's overwhelming. And as we'll see, it doesn't mean that Ephraim, that Israel, hasn't earned a whooping. Doesn't mean that they're not going to get some reproof and instruction. Spare the rod, spoil the child. But reproof and instruction is different than destruction. Yahweh disciplines those that he loves. He destroys those that don't love him. And so if you're going through something right now, respect the reproof and instruction that Elohim is giving you so that you might become the person who's better equipped to handle the blessing that is coming on the other side of the reproof and instruction for your benefit, tertiary to the Father's benefit. For we know that all things work together for the good of Elohim. Book of Romans. Deuteronomy 28. If you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, then you will be blessed. And we experience blessings, I would submit, as a byproduct of Yah's will being done and you being participatory in his will being done. But in order for you to participate, you must be in a state of no sin, no lawlessness. Because Isaiah tells us your sins have created a separation between you and Yah. Now, how do you do that? Washed in the blood of the Lamb, made new under the renewed covenant of Hebrews chapter 8. Go read Hebrews chapter 8 if you haven't lately. And I will put my laws, my Torah, in their mind and write them on their heart, and then they will be my Elohim. Then they will be my people, and I will be their Elohim. And then I will remember their sins and their lawlessness no more. And so Elohim is looking at his children, Ephraim, Israel, his sons, like these little children, having compassion, saying, how could I destroy you? Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. My heart turns within me, all my compassion is kindled. I shall not let the heat of my wrath burn. I shall not destroy Ephraim, for I am El, and not man, the set apart one in your midst, and I shall not come in enmity. There's a beautiful commentary by Spurgeon on that one line. Let me see if I can find it. What passes for forgiveness among men is nothing like the amazing forgiveness of God. Suppose that someone had grievously offended any one of you, and that he asked your forgiveness. Do you think that you would say to him, well, yes, I forgive you, but I cannot forget it? Ah, dear friends, that sort of forgiveness with one leg chopped off is a lame forgiveness and not worth much. The forgiveness of Elohim is great in magnitude, incomprehensible compared to the forgiveness that we as men are able to muster. Look at verse 10. Let them follow Yahweh. Like a lion, he roars. When he roars, then sons shall tremble from the west, like a lion of the tribe of Judah. Matthew chapter 1. Mashiach. Let them follow Yahweh. Like a lion. No one comes to the Father but through me. Like a lion, he roars. When he roars, then sons shall tremble from the west. They shall tremble like a bird from Mitzrayim and like a dove from the land of Ashur, Assyria. And I shall let them dwell in their own houses, Israel, declares Yahweh, like the lost sheep being gathered up. Ephraim has surrounded me with lying, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah is still wandering with Elohim and is the true to the set apart one. So as the time of this writing with Hosea, Israel is backsliding. Israel is going astray, but Judah is still wandering with El and is true to the set apart one. Think of the parable of the prodigal son. And if we think of these two houses, these two brothers, Ephraim and Judah, throughout the history of the people of Elohim, who the prodigal son was has changed based upon the era that we were in. Right now, we could argue till the cows come home who it is that's the good servant and who it is who's the prodigal son. Chapter 12. Ephraim is feeding on wind and pursuing an east wind. East winds are typically destructive. They bring drought. Drought brings famine. All the day he increases falsehood and ruin, and they make a covenant with Ashur, and oil is sent to Mitzrayim, appeasement of Egypt, and in covenant with Assyria. Who they're supposed to be in covenant with? Yeah, Elohim. And Yahweh has a controversy with Judah, to punish Jacob according to his ways, to repay him according to his deeds. So here in 12, we get into a compare-contrast between Jacob, the father of the tribes of Israel, renamed Israel after he wrestles with Elohim made flesh, which is called a Christophany, the personage of Yahweh upon the face of the earth prior to what we know as the Christ, the Mashiach, the anointed of the Most High, is found in the New Testament and the four canonical Gospels. Many people get jammed up here because it requires the shattering of a paradigm for one to realize, for one to accept that the first time Yahweh walked the face of the earth was not in the book of Matthew. As we've discussed on a multitude of previous videos, who did Jacob wrestle with? Elohim. Who did Joshua bow down to on the road into the promised land? Elohim made flesh. Who was Melchizedek, as Shaul runs on and on and on about in the book of Hebrews? Elohim made flesh. Who was the capital M messenger of Elohim that appears to Manova, the parents of Samson, goes up in flames of the burnt offering? Elohim made flesh. I could do this all day. The personage of the Christ, the anointed Mashiach, before the time of the Gospels. So Jacob wrestles with Elohim. He took his brother by the heel in the womb. So there's an element of deceit there. And in ancient Israel, somebody who grabbed the heel was considered to be somebody who was untrustworthy in their dealings. And in his strength, he strove with Elohim. Well, there it is in black and white. He strove with Elohim. He strove with the messenger, capital M messenger, Elohim made flesh, Yeshua, and overcame. This is literally what Israel means when Jacob is renamed from Jacob to Israel, Yisrael. It's a triune meaning, threefold meaning. He who strives with Elohim, he who has overcome with Elohim, and he who is ruling with Elohim. We've covered this topic 100 times, at least in our Bible studies, but A, we have new people here, always, every week. Welcome, new people. B, the reminder is oftentimes needed of who we are, so that we remember who we are, and so that we don't suffer from a modern-day identity crisis, rooted in the world rather than rooted in our relationship with Yah. This word Yisrael, Israel, models the development of our relationship with the Most High. First, we struggle with Him. I don't know about you, but I struggled with Him for a decade. And I mean fought him tooth and nail. Hand-to-hand combat. Guess who won? And then we overcome with Elohim. And we see that in verse 4. He overcame, he wept, and sought his favor. How do we wrestle with the Creator and win? The only way that you wrestle with the Creator and win is to submit. And he wept and sought his favor. I submit to you, brothers and sisters, that this concept of Jacob overpowering the Creator of the universe is less literal and more physical, more spiritual, less physical, more metaphysical. He overcame when he confessed. And then he says, bless me. And we get some clarification here from Hosea of what his mental, emotional, spiritual state was, expanding upon Genesis 32. He overcame, Jacob overcame, and he wept and sought his, Elohim's, favor. He submitted to Elohim. So first we strive with Elohim, we struggle with him, then we overcome. How do we overcome? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. The blood of the Lamb, confession of Yeshua HaMashiach, and the word of our testimony. If you read the entire Bible, not just parts of the New Testament based upon what your Bible study plan tells you to read or what the pastor says on Sunday morning, you would realize that the word of the testimony is a direct allusion to the Ten Commands and the Torah as a whole. The Ark of the Witness, right, also called the Ark of the Covenant, was a testimony to testify to the word of Elohim, the commands that were literally stored inside of it, written by the finger of Elohim. So we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony. And then we rule. He who overcomes, he who strives with, he who is overcome with, and he who is ruling with is what Israel means. And ruling is what man was made to do. If that sounds a little pretentious to you, I'm sorry, but you've been indoctrinated. I will make of you a nation of kings and priests. Yeah, but who said that? Messiah said that in Revelation 1. Moshe said that speaking on behalf of the Creator, Moses, in Exodus 19, verse 6. Yah, the Creator, said it in Genesis chapter 2. It's a foundational concept. The reason that man and mankind exists is to rule and subdue. That is the work of a king, a ruler. So the word Israel means he who is striving with, he who has overcome with, and he who is ruling with Elohim. Israel's own children, the 12 tribes, some of them continued to strive with, some of them overcame with, and some of them were literally ruling with Elohim. And so Jacob, verse 4, he strove with the messenger, capital M, Yeshua, and overcame and wept and sought his favor. He found him in Beit El, the house of Elohim, Bethel. And there he spoke to us. That, even Beit El, is prophetic, the house of Elohim. Beit El, Bethel, Bethlehem, Yeshua. Even Yahweh, Elohim of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth. Elohim of hosts means heavenly hosts, and these hosts are angels arrayed in battle. That's the connotation of that phrase. It's like the general. Even Yahweh, Elohim of hosts, Yahweh is his remembrance. We see Elohim of hosts in the personage of Yah made flesh when Joshua is going into the promised land. Joshua sees a man in the middle of the road, and Joshua, the cojones on this guy, goes up to him and says, "Are you for us or against us?" And the man of Elohim, capital M, man of Elohim, responds, "You're for me." And says, "I am come now as commander of the hosts of the heavens." And Joshua falls down and does obeisance. This wasn't just an angel, because every time an angel is worshipped by man, the angel says, "Stop, get up, I'm just like you, knock it off." No, Joshua was permitted to worship. Meaning, this was not a false god. This was God in the flesh. "Therefore return to your Elohim, guard loving commitment and right ruling, and wait on your Elohim continually." Return to your first love, Messiah tells us, rebuking the churches in Revelation. A merchant, other translations have this as a Canaanite, a filthy heathen trader. In his hands are scales of deceit. He loved to oppress. Scales of deceit. Proverbs 11, verse 1. "A false scale is an abomination to Yahweh, but a perfect weight is his delight." And I realize some people, an abomination is a word that might be foreign to you. And so to give you some context on this, Deuteronomy 32. Where is it? Deuteronomy 32 is so metal. There it is. Deuteronomy 32, verse 16. "They moved him, Yahweh, to jealousy with foreign matters. With abominations they provoked him." And so sin is transgression of the law, the Torah. New Testament definition, 1 John 3, verse 4. In the words of the Apostle John, sin is transgression of the Torah. All who do sin do lawlessness. With the major implication of there was no sin in Messiah, meaning he wasn't lawless. Read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in the words of Paul, "Lawlessness is the working of Satan." So be careful when you listen to any air quote preacher, pastor, rabbi, bishop, whatever. It says, "Oh, it was nailed to the cross. The law was nailed to the cross." That's the working of Satan. If you don't believe me, and you shouldn't, you should believe the word, read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Sin is transgression of the law. Abominations provoke Yah against you. Remember that Yahuwah of hosts, the commander of the host of the heavens? Look at Deuteronomy 32:39. "See now that I am he, and there is no Elohim besides me. I put to death, and I make alive. I have wounded, and I heal. And from my hand no one delivers." This is the wrath that he is staying from Israel, who he views as a toddler in Hosea 11 and 12. "I put to death, I make alive. I have wounded, and I heal. And from my hand no one delivers. For I lift my hands to the heavens and say, as I live forever, I have sharpened my flashing sword, and my hand takes hold on judgment. I shall return vengeance to my enemies and repay those who hate me. I make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword devours flesh, with the blood of the slain and the captives, from the long-haired enemy chiefs. O nations, acclaim his people, for he avenges the blood of his servants and returns vengeance to his adversaries, and shall pardon his land and his people. His land. Thought it was an inheritance for the children of Israel. It is. They are his people, and their job is to rule and subdue it, just like our job is to rule and subdue. Because covenants stack. They don't replace each other. They stack. And if you know what the rainbow means, a sign of the covenant in the sky, that never again will the Father destroy the earth with water, which is, as an anecdote, the primary issue that I take with Ben Davidson and Suspicious Observers, who I respect and who I've had on the show. Yah said, never again will I destroy the earth with water. And he put a rainbow in the sky as a sign of a covenant between him and all mankind, that he would never do that again. Well, just yesterday, we saw two rainbows, one directly above the other in the sky. One rainbow did not replace the other. They stacked. But as we were saying, a merchant, a filthy Canaanite, in his hands are scales of deceit. He loved to oppress. Don't. Unequal weights and measures are an abomination. Abominations piss Yah off, and now he's working against you. And Ephraim's, what's an abomination biblically? Homosexuality, consumption of swine, pork, unequal weights and measures, he that provokes a brother against another brother. And Ephraim says, indeed, I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors, they shall find in me no crookedness, that is sin. Yeah, so Ephraim passed his own judgment on whether or not he was sinning. And his wealth he has found for himself. Is wealth bad? No. Biblically, wealth is provided to us by the Father to be a blessing to other people. I've actually been doing a massive study on wealth here lately, biblically. If that's something you're interested in seeing, comments. I've got 15 hours or so of study thus far into what's the biblical reason for wealth. And a lot of it hinges upon Deuteronomy 8, which you should flip to. And we'll start at 1. Guard to do every command which I command you today, that you might live and shall increase and go in, and shall possess the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers, shall increase. The parable of the talents, notice that the trustworthy steward is he who increased, who multiplied the gift that he was given. The wicked and lazy servant is he who hid the talent in the ground and did not increase it. So being a trustworthy steward requires increase, requires multiplication, return on investment. And the better you do that, he who can be trusted with little can be trusted with much. And you shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not. Again, if you're going through some stuff right now, my brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, for the proving of your faith. To humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not. And he humbled you and let you suffer hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. Quoted by Messiah in Matthew chapter 4:4. Go to 11. Be on guard lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands and his right rulings and his laws which I command you today. Lest you eat and be satisfied and build lovely houses and shall dwell in them, and your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and gold are increased, and all that you have is increased, that your heart then becomes lifted up, and you forget Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and awesome wilderness, fiery serpents and scorpions and thirst, where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and try you, to do you good in the end. Then you shall say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand have made for me this wealth. But you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, in order to establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is today. As it is today. The giving of wealth comes from Yah. The power to get wealth comes from Yah, for the establishment of the covenant. And it shall be, if by any means you forget Yahweh your Elohim and follow other mighty ones and serve them and bow yourself to them, like Israel in Hosea 11:12 that we're reading right now. I have warned you this day, you shall certainly perish. Like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you are to perish, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. Look at verse 18 again. But you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, in order to establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is today. Part of this covenant being established between us and the Father is the power to get wealth. When we get wealth, it's not the work of our hands, it's not our ingenuity, it's not our stick-to-itiveness. It's the faithfulness of the Father that his word will not return to him void, as established in his covenant with us. That we will be fruitful, that we will increase, that we will multiply. Deuteronomy 28. All of Deuteronomy 28, by the way, all those blessings are physical blessings. Not that there aren't spiritual blessings as well, but they're physical blessings. Your flocks, your herds, your crops, your children, your storehouses, they're all physical blessings. So that, here's the point, so that you can be a blessing to other people, so that you have the means to forsake not the widow and the orphan, the means to make offerings to Elohim, the means to go and spread the good word, the means to be obedient. There's a proverb for this. Give me my lawful bread. In fact, maybe we'll go there real quick. I love the Proverbs. Assuming I can find the right one. They're so good. I just ADD'd out flipping through the Proverbs. Bear with me a moment. None of this is planned, by the way. I just go where the Spirit leads. Give me my lawful bread. Where are you? Ah, there it is. Proverbs 30, verse 8. But we'll read 1 through 8 because we're here. The words of Agor, son of Yakah, the message. This man declared to Ethiel and to Ethiel and Ukal, for I am more stupid than anyone, and do not have the understanding of a man, and have not learned wisdom, that I should know the knowledge of the set apart one. Who has gone up to the heavens and come down? Yeshua. Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Yeshua. Who has bound the waters in a garment? Yeshua. Who established all the ends of the earth? Yeshua. What is his name? Yahweh. And what is his son's name? Yeshua, if you know it. Every word of Elohim is tried. He is a shield to those taking refuge in him. Now, this is a stupid man who has not obtained knowledge of Elohim. Yet listen to the wisdom of this. And we think we're smart today because we've got CRISPR gene editing software and AI and ballistic missiles. Every word of Elohim is tried. He is a shield to those taking refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he reprove you, and you be found a liar. 2 matters I have asked of you. Deny them not to me before I die. Remove falsehood and a lying word far from me. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me my lawful bread, lest I become satisfied and deny you. and say, who is Yahweh, and lest I be poor and steal, and seize the name of my Elohim. Ephraim in 12:7, Hosea. And Ephraim says, indeed, I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors, they shall find in me no crookedness that is in sin. No. Elohim blessed you with wealth. You may be a hard worker. You may be smart. You may have a mind for business. I could say those statements apply to me. I work really hard, and I've been in business 2.5 decades. But every dime that I have, every bit of dirt that I have, every 2x4 and sheet of drywall, all my inventory, it all comes from Elohim, so that I may be a blessing to others. And that is the mindset and the heart set that Ephraim is lacking in Hosea 12. And because of that, look at verse 9. But I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Since the land of Mitzrayim, I've been with you since Egypt. Again, I shall make you dwell in tents, as in the day of the appointed time. So dwelling in tents here. Have you ever been extreme camping? It's intense. Ha ha ha. This is Sukkot, y'all. The appointed time of dwelling in tents, which represents eternity with Elohim. It also represents being humbled. Nice house. Now you live in a tent so that you can remember how to serve me and worship me again. Yeah. And even that, they're not destitute. They're not homeless. They're in a tent. And I have spoken to the prophets and have increased visions. And through the prophets, I gave parables. He's like, guys, I tried to warn you. I've sent you prophets. I've given visions. I've given parables. All of this, Yeshua. Is Gilead wicked? Certainly they have been false. In Gilgal they have slaughtered bulls. Also their slaughter places are as heaps on a plowed field. There's a lot to unpack in verse 11. So let's just do that 53 minutes into this video. Is Gilead wicked? Gilead is east of the Jordan River. This is the land grant that went to Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Gilead in the Bible is oftentimes synonymous with the tribe of Gad. Gilead became known as a place of insurrection. The first king of Israel, King Shaul, Absalom, who tried to lead a military coup against his father David. Ahab tried to rule and subdue Gilead, and then shortly thereafter died. Squarely in the inheritance of Israel, and oftentimes associated with disobedience to Yah. Is Gilead wicked? Certainly they have been false. Now, Gilead is also an area known for its pine trees. So much so that there's a species of pine tree, the Gileadanos pina resinosus, or whatever the freaking Latin is, that produces a resin that was used in healing. And so Gilead also became a place of physicians. It's referenced, I believe, in Jeremiah 8. And so they became very focused on physical healing in Gilead, not in spiritual healing. And so this is the context with which is Gilead wicked, Yahweh speaks. Certainly they've been false, because they tried to heal the body without healing the soul. And they were in constant insurrection and rebellion against Yahweh. What about in Gilgal? They've slaughtered bulls. Gilgal, now what's the connotation of slaughtering bulls before we do a brief dive on Gilgal? Slaughtering bulls to who? Not to Yahweh. In false worship. That's the issue here. To other false gods. To Baal, remember, we go back to 11. They called to them, so they went from their face. They slaughtered to Baals, false gods, and burned incense and carved images. In Gilgal, they have slaughtered bulls. Okay? What is Gilgal? The effrontery of slaughtering to false gods in Gilgal. Gilgal is where Joshua had all of his men circumcised, and they did the Passover again. No, I'm sorry, that was Moshe, I believe. And they did the Passover. No, it might have been Joshua. More coffee is indicated. You guys remember the story from the Old Testament? The heap of foreskins, the mountain of foreskins. Circumcision representing what? In covenant with Yah. They performed the Pesach, remembrance of the covering of blood, so that death has passed them over. A thing that we still do today. Indicative of what? The covenant of Elohim, by the blood of the Lamb, Mashiach, that death has passed us over. Gilgal is where Joshua made a stack of stones where they walked across the dry land in the Jordan River after Moshe had died. And Joshua was leading them into the promised land. Remember, the children of Israel walked over the Sea of Reeds on dry land. Yahweh split the waters. And then Joshua, because people were concerned about whether Joshua had the same horsepower as Moshe. And so Yah was with Joshua, Yahushua, the same as he was with Moshe. And Joshua walks over on dry ground. And so they make a stack of stones there as a remembrance in Gilgal that Yahweh was with Moshe. 3 prophets were from Gilgal. A little fellow named Shemuel, he who anointed the first king of Israel, Saul. Kind of a big deal. And then some other guys you might have heard of, one of which was named Elijah. Elijah taken in a whirlwind by the Most High. He did not die to go be with the Creator. He was just taken. And then his understudy, also a man of no small means, spiritual giant named Elisha, all dwelled in Gilgal. And so this is what Yah's saying. In freaking Gilgal, they're worshiping false gods. With all this history, with all these reminders, in Gilgal, you turn your face from Elohim and fall into false worship. There's almost an element of disgust here. And that Yah says, also their slaughter places are as heaps on a plowed field. Have you ever seen a plowed field? There's piles of rocks that they make into heaps to remove the rock from the field so that with every pass and every season it becomes easier and easier and easier, and the heap of rocks gets larger and larger. And he's saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do with your slaughter places. Cool story, bro. You want to worship a false god? Watch this. I will stack them up like piles of rocks in a plowed field. Which goes back to the metaphor of plowing the field of your heart. When Jacob fled to the country of Aram, Syria, Aramaean, our father, Abraham, was a wandering Aramaean. Great passphrase, by the way. Yeah, for you worried about end-time security. You should pick something like that only your people know. That's not one that we use, because why would I tell the internet that? But what a great passphrase. Der Password. Our father was a wandering Aramaean. All right, he's cool. Let him in. Israel served for a wife. Bro. The parable of the 10 virgins. Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept watch. And by a prophet, Yahweh brought Israel out of Mitzrayim, and by a prophet he was watched over, Moshe. And now, our prophet, and more than that, is Yeshua. A lot of people don't like Yeshua being called a prophet. And I don't like when people say things that are counter to the Word of God, aka the Bible, because there's this Luke 24, one of my favorite chapters. After the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua. Luke 24, verse 15, and it came to be as they were talking and reasoning that Yeshua himself drew near and went to them. But their eyes were restrained so that they did not know him. They couldn't tell it was him. And he said to them, what are these words you were exchanging with each other as you were walking, and you're sad? And the one whose name was Cleophas answered and said to him, are you the lone visitor in Jerusalem who does not know what took place in it in these days? And Yeshua said to them, what? And they said to him, concerning Yeshua of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before Elohim and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and impaled him. We, however, were expecting that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Redeem who? Israel. Oh, I'm a Gentile believer. Yeah, grafted in Romans 11 into the tree of life. The olive tree, in certain translations, aka Hebrew idiom tree of life, is Israel. You want to be Israel, not the nation state over there in the Middle East, the people group of the Father, per Genesis 32, as we've already explained in this video. We, however, were expecting that it was he, Yeshua, who was going to redeem Israel. But besides all this, today is the third day since the matters took place. But certain women of ours who arrived at the tomb early also astonished us when they did not find his body. They came saying they had seen a vision of messengers who said he was alive. And some of those with us went to the tomb and found it. And as also the women had said, could you imagine how excited they would have been trying to testify to somebody about this? As also the women had said, but they did not see him. And Yeshua said to them, O thoughtless ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Messiah to suffer these and to enter into his esteem, Mashiach ben Joseph? And beginning at Moshe and all the prophets, Yeshua was explaining to them in all the scriptures the matters concerning himself. In all the scriptures, huh? Because the New Testament had been written by this point somewhere around 33 AD. Oh wait, no, it wasn't written yet. So what scriptures was Yeshua referring to? The Old Testament. It was done away with. That's for the Jews. Okay, blasphemer. No, it was not. Read Colossians chapter 2. What was nailed to the cross, the staros, the stake, was your religious ideologies. Therefore, let no man judge you in eating or drinking or the keeping of Sabbath or the high holy days or the new moons, which is a shadow of what is to come. Read Revelation. We do the appointed times, the Moedim that the Father's talking about in Hosea 12:9, in the presence of Yeshua HaMashiach, in the presence of Christ, in the millennial kingdom and in eternity. There are Levites in the kingdom. For what? Levites got one job, bro. Serve the temple. And a prophet, and by a prophet, Yahweh brought Israel out of Mitzrayim. Hosea 12:13. And by a prophet he was watched over. Yeshua now is our prophet, and more so. He's also the Mashiach. And remember that to prophesy, has two biblical meanings. One is to say this shall come to pass in the future, which Yeshua does in Matthew 24. The other is to speak the word of Elohim, which Yeshua does constantly. I am convinced that everything that came out of Yeshua's mouth can be tied to the Old Testament. All of it. Every parable, every rebuke, every word of healing, every teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, all of it comes to the Old Testament, as we just saw in Luke 24. And beginning with Moshe and all the prophets, he revealed to them from the scriptures Ephraim has provoked most bitterly, so his master left his blood guilt on him and repaid him for his reproach. Now the repaying of Ephraim here, as we saw in Deuteronomy 32, I make my arrows drunk with blood. Repaying him for his actions, this reproof, reaping what you sow, is different than destruction. Because as we've seen here in 11, verse 8, how could I give you up, Ephraim? How could I hand you over, Israel? How could I make you like Admah? How could I set you like Seboim, destroy you like Sodom and Gomorrah? My heart turns within me, my compassion is kindled. He doesn't wipe Ephraim out. He doesn't wipe Israel out. But he does reprove them. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yahweh reproves and instructs those that he loves. If you've ever had to give your kid a spanking, now I'm not for child abuse. And I think of the 4 children that the Father has currently blessed me with, I think I've issued a total of 4 spankings in my entire job as a fatherhood, 2 to each of my older children. That's all it takes. If you're raising them up in the way that they should go so they do not depart from it when they are older. And a spanking, a little whooping, is far different from utterly destroying somebody, removing them from your house, never speaking with them again. And when you spank your kids, it hurts you more than it hurts them. But you do it for their own good, so that they'll learn. All corrective action in nature is painful. But we correct their action because we love them. Because we know if they continue down that pathway of disobedience, it will lead to destruction. And we don't want them to be destroyed. And so here in Hosea 12 verse 14, the Father is not destroying them. He's correcting them. So his master left his blood guilt on him and repaid him for his reproach. Repaid him. Yet and still, he continues to exist. But he earned a whooping and he got one. That's Hosea 11 and 12. 26 verses, an hour and 8 minutes. I appreciate y'all. I hope you enjoyed this. And I'll see you when I see you. Shalom.